I'm Sarah Trevelyan, owner and founder of Sarah Loves to Sew and the Beginner Sewing Boxes. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make one of these, a reusable shopper bag. So instead of using plastic bags, take your shopper with you, and it's got this gorgeous print, which if you can see, it looks like it's woven, but it's print, so it's not as heavy. It folds up really nice and small. It's got a good base there and it is lined. So this is the Beginner Sewing Box kit that if you subscribe to on sarahlovetosew.com before March 15th, you'll get the kit for this bag delivered to your door. So let's make it. First thing that we're going to do to make our gorgeous eco shopper bag is cut the fabric out. So in your beginner sewing boxes, you'll have received the blue fabric, which will be our outer fabric, and the lining fabric. And we're going to be cutting two rectangles, big rectangles, out of the lining and out of the blue. And they're going to be 21 inches wide by 20 inches deep. But on the blue, we're also going to be cutting down a longer strip of 22 inches by 5 inches wide. So it's really important that when you measure your 21 inches, you do it as far to the edge as you can, so that when you cut down your 21 inches, this will be a big rectangle. You've still got this double folded space here that we're going to get 22 inches by 5 from, and this is the fabric folded over, so we're cutting 2 of each, so we'll have 2 handles and the front and the back of the bag. Okay, let's get cutting. So I've measured 21 and just marked 21, and then we're going to measure 20 down this way as well. And then if you've got one of these rulers, they are really good at getting them straight. And that's going down to 20. And then that's going to leave you enough fabric on the side so that you can then cut the 2 straps out of this side. So they're going to be 22 inches long by 5 inches. You should have your 2 straps and 2 of the lining and 2 of the outer fabric cut. Now we'll start constructing the bag. First of all, we're going to get the handles ready. So if you get one of the 5 by 22 inch piece of fabric, these will be the handles. So I'll just explain. This is the handle on the bag. Okay, so to get it like that, we need to just fold the handle along the length so that the edges line up, and just press along that edge. If you don't have an iron handy, then you could just thumb press it and run your nail along the edge. But I'm going to just use my these little mini irons, and tabletop ironing boards are really handy. It's the wool mat. Once you've done that, open up the handle, and this time take the outer edges and bring them to that center line that you've just created, and again press down the edge. And we're going to do the same with the other edge. Okay, so you're going to bring the outer edge to meet that center line and press. And these will create a really strong, nice tidy handle that will be strong enough to hold all your shopping or your groceries or whatever you choose to carry in this shopper bag.
Then fold and press.
It will actually hold quite a lot. It held a lot more than I was expecting actually. So I filled the bag up with groceries to photograph, and I just kept on filling. I was running out of things to put in it. I was like, oh my word, another box of cereal, another bag of potatoes. So these will be the really strong handles. So what you want to do now is take it to the sewing machine and sew with just a straight stitch all the way down, making sure you get both those edges in. So you can pin it and then sew along. So you want to get it quite close to the edge but not off the edge, and also sew down the other side as well, so that the finished thing will look really neat like that. So you've got stitching on both sides. So you do exactly the same with the other handle. So the thread that you've got in the box, you can put some on the bobbin, so you've got matching thread top and bottom. And I'm just going to do a straight stitch with a 2.5 stitch length. So I start about 1 centimetre away from the edge and I go backwards and then forwards. And this just secures the stitching. Stitch all the way to the other end, making sure you're getting both in. So you don't want to be too close to the edge, just in case you miss the other side. And then to make it look pretty, we're just going to go down the other side. So I secure with a few back stitches on that one, and then we're going to go and do the same along the other edge. So again, about 1 centimetre back. There we have it. That's one of the handles made. So you need to do the same with the other one and then put those handles to the side for the time being. Get the two outer fabrics and put those right sides together, lining it all up, and then pin and sew along the bottom edge only. So we're going to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance and just sew along the bottom edge. Once you've sewn along the bottom edge, you want to turn it out and then press the seam open. And then you're going to need the iron again after this. We're going to iron down the top of the bag. And this will just give it really nice, neat edge at the top. So the next thing to do is to fold in the ends, and that's going to be 1 inch fold and then iron. So I'll just get my ruler, if I can find it. Here it is. So it's there. Press those down. And do this to the other side as well. Oops. Press that little bit there. So that's 1 inch. You can just eyeball that really if you like, or if you're very precise, you can measure it. Once you've ironed those edges down, you're going to sew up the bag. So put right sides together, and then we're going to pin and sew up the sides. Once we've pinned it, we're going to sew it, the sides together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, starting about a centimetre away, reversing and then going straight down. Just make sure you take the pins out as you go if you're going to get them caught up with the foot. We're going to do this along both the sides. Once you've sewn up the side seams, press them open. So it's easier on an ironing board. I'm just using one of these like miniature hand things, usually used for sleeves when you're dressmaking. That comes in very handy to do this as well. So we're going to press open the seams on both sides, and this will give it a really neat finish on the outside and help us when we come to making the boxed out corners in a second. So just press those seams open. So the handy thing about this bag is that it folds up really small as well, so you can pack it down really small and then it does hold an awful lot, and you can just feel it feels strong. You don't sort of worry about it breaking or ripping or anything like you might a shop carrier. Next thing that you want to do is fold the corner so that the side seam and the bottom seam line up like so. So you can feel with your finger and side it and then double check it like that. So you're going to create this point, and this is where we create the bottom of the bag so that it will stand up and be quite stable on its own. So if you want, you can just pin that in place. So we want to measure 3.5 inches from the corner, not including the seam allowance. So that's 1, 2, 3.5, and then we're going to draw a line across that way. So that's 1, 2, 3.5. I'll just take my pins out here actually. And then you want to draw a line across the bottom of the corner there. And I'm going to do the same on the other side. I'll just pin that like that. So we measured 3.5 inches and then drew the line across. We're going to sew that, and that will box out the corner. And we'll do the same on the other side. So open seams, it should be pressed. I'm just going to snip through the scissors. I'm just going to snip that there because I've sewn the seam allowance down, making it a bit tricky to line them up. So we're just going to get the seams aligned again, and we're going to do the same. We're going to measure 3.5 inches and draw a line across. So 3.5 from the corner, not from the actual seam allowance. That's 1, 2, 3.5, and then where's my pen gone? So there are different ways of boxing out corners. For those of my members that have done the other zip pouches, we've done it the other way, where you cut out squares, but this is easier because it's a bigger bag, so it's easy. This technique is actually a bit easier to do on a bigger project, I find. So we're just going to take that to the machine and sew along both of those corners. So once you've stitched along that line that you've drawn, cut the corner off with a half an inch away from the stitching, and then do the same on the other corner, making sure you're not going to cut any of the actual bag itself. So once you've done that, the next thing is to turn the outer bag the right way round, making sure that you push into those corners that you've just sewn. And then you need to do the lining. So just put that one aside and we'll sew the lining. Take the two pieces of lining and we pin down the sides, so the right sides together, so there is a slightly shinier side on this fabric, but it doesn't really matter, I don't think, which way round you have them. So line them all up and then pin down the sides and across the bottom and along the other side, and then with a ½ inch seam allowance you're going to sew along those. So the same as before, start a little bit from the end and go backwards and forwards again, and you're sewing down the sides, down one side, across the bottom and back up the other side with this ½ inch seam allowance. Now, because you're sewing the lining that's going to fit inside the other bag, you could, if you wanted to do, so that the lining fits nice and snugly, just make the lining that tiny little bit smaller than the actual bag. So rather than just the ½ inch seam allowance, if you go a slightly bit bigger, then the inside of the lining will just be that little bit smaller, so that it will then just slip nicely into the outer fabric. So you want to sew all the way along to the end, and stop just over ½ an inch away and turn the corner, and then you're on the home stretch and sew all the way along to the top. Like we did with the outer fabric, once you've sewn along the sides and the bottom, we are going to open those out and iron them. So this will again really help make a difference when the bags, the outer and the inner, are put together, and it will help it have nice crisp edges. So press all of those open. If you've got an ironing board, that'd be easier, I think. Use the pointy end of the ironing board, but for me here on my little desk and my ironing mat, I'll just use this to help me. So once you've ironed all the seams open, we will then iron down the top by an inch like we did on the outer fabric. And then we're getting very close to completing the shopper bag. So obviously don't worry about the contrasting thread on the lining. I think it adds quite a nice little detail when we sew the handles on in a second, and it will focus you to get it nice and even. Otherwise it will stand out a little bit. If you do have other threads at home and you don't like the contrasting thread look, then obviously you can use that instead on the lining, but I quite like how it looks with the navy. Okay, so like we did, I've marked it this time, turn the edges down by an inch, and iron those in place. You can line up the seams as you do this. And you can always measure and double check that it is an inch that we're turning down. So that's a bit big there. Bring that one up a bit. And this, of course, will just make a nice neat edge along the top, because we will place this lining inside the other bag. Next, we're going to box the corners like we did before. So you line up the side seam and the bottom seam, the side seam and the bottom seam, and measure 3.5 inches from the tip of the corner, don't include the seam allowance, and then we'll draw the line across, use that as a guide then for the stitching. So 1, 2, 3.5, draw the line. We're going to do this for both corners. Pin that in place to help keep it secure. Do the same on the other corner. So if it helps to line up the corners, sometimes I put my hand inside the bag and just make sure that we're getting those seams lined up. So open the seam out and line it up, and then press. So we're going to measure again, 3.5 from the point. 1, 2, 3.5. And actually on these rulers, I forgot you can check your angles. Can you see it's got the angle on there? So if you want it to be absolutely, mine's slightly off, absolutely perfect, you can double check with that. So we're going to draw the line across and pin and sew. So sew those 2 lines, and then you cut the excess fabric like we did with a half inch away from the line. Okay, so we've just sewn those lines up and cut them. I love the sound of cutting fabric with these scissors. Just cut the ends off 1/2 inch or so away from where you've sewn. The thing that we need to do is sew in the handles. So get the handles that you've made. That was the first thing that we did. So we need those, and we're going to sew them onto the lining. So the first thing that you're going to do is to measure. So we're going to measure with the lining together and the seam nice and straight there. You're going to line with a inch turn down, measure 6 inches in from both sides and mark. And mark it on the other side. So once you've marked the 6 inches in from both sides, you're going to then line up the edge of the handle. Let me just move the ruler out of the way, with the edge, the raw edge of this turn. So you want to put them on the inside of the marks, and then you're going to pin them in place. So do that for both the handles, making sure that the handle is obviously not twisted. So just follow it all the way up, keeping it nice and straight, and then it will just curve round naturally and then line it up on the inside of the other mark, lining up again with the raw edges. Then we're going to sew it. So I've pinned the handle on quite securely, because now we're going to take it to the machine and we're going to sew a square with a cross through it, and this will keep the handle in place. So I'm going to reverse a little bit. So you just sew your square, keep it nice and straight, and obviously you're just sewing through the one layer of bag. You don't want to sew the linings closed. And then once you've sewn the square, sew the cross through it. And I'm just going to go along the short side back up to the other corner, and then around the other way. And I'll finish with some reverse. And that should be nice and secure now. Now we're going to do the same with the other side of this handle, and then we will repeat the whole process with the handle on the other side of the bag. So once you've sewn the crosses on all of the handles, we are now going to put the lining inside the outer fabric. So you can turn down the outer, this makes things a bit easier, and then pop in the lining. And you're going to push those corners together, turn the hems up and match the seams on the side there. So they've both got the hem, and just push in that seam allowance. So you'll be sewing that, but you can just hide that little seam allowance there and there, and pin it in place. And you do this all the way around the edges, like so, just lining them up. So you're going to pin this all the way around. Now if you find that there's a little sort of bubble of extra fabric, try and hide it in the seams. So you line the seams up to start with and pin those, and then if you find that it's not fitting exactly, just do a little fold where the lining is, but this is looking quite good. So we're going to pin all the way around the edges, and then you're going to sew the two together by sewing along quite close to the edge, but making sure that you're catching both in. If you wanted to give it a little border, then you can keep the lining higher, but I actually quite like just keeping it nice and flush, so it's nice and neat. And then you take that to the sewing machine and sew it. So to sew this, I'm going to just slide my little accessory sort of tray off so I can get the bag around, because we're sewing in a circle. And I'm going to start at the seam and then just work my way round. I'm actually going to start where I'm going to try and tuck in the little seam allowance there, because I don't want that bit sticking out looking messy. So that's where I'm going to just pinch the fabric tightly together in position, and then as I sew I will keep manipulating the fabric sort of just to make sure it's all lying flat. And off we go. Bear in mind it's obviously going to be thicker going over the seams and the handle, so just slow it down a bit when you get to those areas. So we're coming up to quite a solid section, so just make sure it's fed in nice and smoothly. And I can feel as I'm going around, I'm feeling with my right hand that the two layers are together. Now this can be the final bit of sewing that you do on the bag, or if you want, just to make it look pretty really, you can do a second row around the top, just slightly below this one. So if you wanted to give it another row of stitching. So I'm coming up to the seam again, so I'm going to hide that little bit of seam allowance. And I'll just sort of slightly apply a bit of pressure as I'm pushing it through and making sure this is loose and it's not going to get trapped. And I'm hiding the lining so that you won't see it on the outside, but I'm making sure I'm stitching through the lining as well, because I don't want to have to go back. Get the handle in the right place. So these bags are, as you can see, really quite a nice beginner friendly project that you can do if you've got a meter of both fabrics. So there we go, almost at the end. Reverse stitches to finish. So that's it, that's our bag complete. If you did want to do another row, just do it again now about a centimetre below, but I'm going to keep mine with just the single row on there. There we have it, just trim the loose threads and you've made your fully lined eco bag, eco shopper, ready to show off when you go shopping.
We're gonna keep it low key, keep it softly spoken, with no strings tied.